Julii Johnson, an Oak Park, Michigan native, was a hard-working young mother to her one daughter, Kira. Friends and family say Julii was an outstanding mother and had a very close relationship with her teenage daughter, working very hard to maintain a roof over her and her daughter's head. Julii enjoyed what she did for work. She was a customer service rep via telephone. It was perfect for Julii because she loved to communicate with people and help them with their needs, making their day that much better. Plus, it also helped that the job was a well-paying job. Julii was able to take care of her daughter, pay her bills, and save up for a house because she wanted to be a homeowner. And by all accounts, Julii was very much a people's person. To know Julii was to love her. She just had this infectious, joyous energy that radiated into others. Not only was she so beautiful on the inside, but she was stunning on the outside. Julii was gorgeous. She had this irresistible smile that highlighted this perfect set of cheekbones. Julii was undoubtedly the it girl. All the guys wanted her, and all the girls wanted to be like her. Now, during Julii's 20s, she was down for the fun and dated around as a single young woman. However, as she settled into womanhood and became more stable, she began to yearn for a stable relationship. She even told family and friends that she wanted to fall in love, settle down, and eventually get married. And then, one day in 2014, 32-year-old Julii fell smitten with a man she met in passing. The man at the time was 42-year-old Jimmy Terrell Latner. Julii was crushing hard on Jimmy. She couldn't stop talking about how fine he was and how much she was attracted to him. Eventually, the two linked up and began dating. Jimmy, by all accounts, was a sweetheart. He was so kind towards Julii and very much generous. He had this charisma about him, articulate, intelligent man, and was all about his business. He owned a car wash over in his old stomping grounds in Detroit, Michigan. And although Julii did have her own place, she and Jimmy spent a lot of time together at his place. It was almost as if she lived there. She would even go to work from his place. Julii and Jimmy were for sure in love. Fast forward, by the end of 2016, the couple had already been together for 2 whole years.
Just 34 years old, was found lying on her boyfriend's front lawn.
Police say she was just sitting in her car when someone opened fire. It happened in the Heritage Village subdivision near 13 Mile and Mound.
Sean Lay is live with an update on the investigation and the emotional reaction.
911.
My girlfriend is outside.
Where's she at?
Outside, just running her house.
Who shot her?
I don't know. She ain't breathing.
She's not breathing. Where was she shot at?
I don't know. I just see blood.
It was January, Friday the 13th, 2017. At 7:30 in the morning, 911 dispatchers received a call about a shooting in the Heritage Village subdivision of Warren, Michigan. A man hysterically screaming because his girlfriend was gunned down right outside his home. The man who made the call was 44-year-old Jimmy Terrell Latner, and the victim was his girlfriend, 34-year-old Julii Johnson. EMTs rushed to the scene and saw Julii laying on the ground in her own blood near her vehicle, right outside of her boyfriend Jimmy's condo complex near 13 Mile and Mounds Road. Julii suffered from several gunshot wounds to the torso and one in her forehead. They attempted to give Julii CPR, but saw she was unresponsive at the scene of the crime, so they put her into the ambulance and rushed her to the nearest hospital. Jim can be seen standing outside, distraught, yelling and cursing on the phone, telling someone what just happened. Police approached Jimmy and asked him to go into the back of their cruiser to ask him some questions. You know, when it comes to a murder and there's a significant other involved, authorities will always go to the significant other first for questioning, as many domestic violence disputes has ended up in homicide. In the midst of questioning Jimmy, Police had got the phone call from the hospital that unfortunately Julii had succumbed to her injuries and she passed away. Police had the grueling job of letting Jim know that Julii sadly didn't make it, and Jim lost it. He was distraught. He was visibly hurt and in pain after hearing the news. Police also had to tell the loved ones of Julii about her untimely demise. Everyone was devastated. No one could understand who would want to do something so cruel to such a beautiful spirit. Police had a feeling that the emotion Jim was showing was authentic, but they couldn't be too sure just yet. They had to investigate further for more information. Police waited for Jim to calm down just a bit before asking him exactly what it was that he saw. Jim explained to the police that after he heard the gunshots, he ran outside his condo and saw a man, medium build, with a dark hoodie, running down the trail. And this coincided with what another witness told investigators as well. Investigators wanted to ensure that they could rule Jim out, so they searched both his home and his 2016 Ford F-150 pickup truck. When police searched Jimmy's home, they found over $500,000 in cash and over 2 dozens of burner phones. And in his truck, they found a 9mm Ruger with the serial number scratched off, 2 more burner phones, and an additional $12,000 in cash, along with custom designed hidden compartments, which was something police would usually see most drug dealers utilize in order to stash work, weapons, and cash. Police seized the truck and the cash. It was obvious that Jim was laundering his dirty money into his legitimate car washing business. The findings at Jim's residence and his vehicle made police suspicious, especially finding a 9mm handgun, which could have been the murder weapon used to kill Julii. Investigators did some digging into Jimmy's background, and they learned that he had an extensive criminal history with the sales of narcotics. Apparently, Jim was a very well-known dealer in the drug game in Detroit. He was the leader of the World Domination Gang, which was a well-known drug crew operating out of the west side of Detroit. Police found out that Jimmy at the time was still on probation for federal gun and drug charges. Therefore, police arrested Jimmy for possession of a firearm by a felon. They figured either Jim had something to do with Julii's demise directly, or maybe he made an enemy in the drug field who couldn't get close enough to him, so they got to Julii instead. Police asked the family if they knew anything about Julii and Jimmy's relationship and Jimmy being involved in the drug trade. Julii's family told police that they weren't shocked about Julii being in a relationship with a known drug dealer because she loved the bad boy types. That was what she was attracted to. However, they did express that they were always so very afraid of something like this happening, where Julii could possibly have ended up as collateral damage due to whatever dealings her man had going on. Police asked Jim, who could have wanted to hurt Julii? Who could have wanted to do something so heinous to her? And Jimmy flat out told the police in these exact words: "My wicked, evil ex-girlfriend, Marcy Griffin." Marcy Griffin was the ex-girlfriend and mother to 2 of Jim's children. Marcy and Jim were together for 17 years, but they both moved on into new relationships. And friends of Julii said a lot of women were very jealous of Julii because she was gorgeous. Women couldn't stand the way men would throw themselves at Julii's feet whenever she came around. However, one woman in particular especially had it out for Julii, and that woman was Jim's ex, Marcy Griffin. Loved ones say that Marcy had stalked and harassed Julii for the entire 2-year duration of Julii and Jim's relationship. Marcy would even show up to Julii's job to threaten her and berate her, making her uncomfortable at her own workplace. Then, one day, Marcy had been sent over the edge because Jim had posted to his social media account about how him and Julii took a trip to Las Vegas over the 2017 New Year holiday. Marcy saw this post and flew into an envious rage. You see, Marcy was under the impression that Jim took Julii to Vegas to elope. She just couldn't fathom the idea of the man that she shared 2 children with and a 17-year history solidifying his relationship with his woman under lawful vows. And when Jim got back from Vegas, he was at his place of business, the car wash, when Marcy pulled up on him and confronted him. Marcy was caught on surveillance yelling and going off on Jim. She was heard saying things like, "You married that bitch? Oh, you gonna feel this. I'ma hit you where it hurts," before storming off. With this new information in hand, police wanted to pay Marcy a visit to feel her out and see if there could be any truth to all these claims at all. So, detectives went to her place of employment at an office building in Detroit. And much to the detectives' surprise, Marcy actually opted out of speaking to them. This made detectives very suspicious of Marcy, but they couldn't do anything about it. She wasn't under arrest at the time and hadn't been in any trouble. Therefore, detectives took a different route and asked to see the security footage at Marcy's job on the morning of the murder to see if she was at work. And sure enough, Marcy had a solid alibi. She was seen on camera entering her place of employment, which clearly does not place her at the scene of the crime. At this point, detectives had to retrace their steps, so they headed back over to the nature trail that witnesses said they saw a man running alongside when he fled the scene. Eureka! Police have found the physical evidence that the suspect tossed on the trail, a 9mm Smith & Wesson and a pair of gloves. This prompted detectives to later bring out the K9 unit to sniff out any additional evidence, and that's when they came across the 7 shell casings to the rounds that were fired to kill Julii. Investigators were sure to collect all the evidence to test for DNA. Police noticed a shopping area was nearby, so they went over there and asked every single establishment if they could look at their surveillance footage. And it was the LA Fitness Center's security cameras that provided detectives with some information. Although the footage wasn't very crisp, investigators were able to see that an SUV had parked near the trail at about 7 a.m. And then a man in a dark hoodie, medium built, just as Jim and the witness described the man they saw running from the scene that morning, can be seen exiting the SUV from the passenger's side. About 30 minutes later, the suspect can be seen running back to the SUV, getting into the SUV, and then the SUV speeding off. And now, with this footage, police believed there were 2 suspects involved, since clearly the perp who exited and entered the vehicle was not the person driving the vehicle. Being that the video was such bad quality, investigators weren't able to make out the license plate number on the SUV. Police were becoming discouraged as the days were passing and they still didn't have a suspect. But then, a breakthrough in the case came when detectives got a call from the crime lab. The DNA on the gloves that was found at the crime scene matched a DNA sample that was already in the database. Plus, the firearm that police found on the nature trail matched the rounds of bullets that were recovered from Julii's body. The DNA evidence that came back gave detectives the name Eric Gibson. Eric, who was 24 years old at the time, also matched the description of the person seen going to and from the crime scene. But detectives wondered, what connection did Eric have to Julii? Police suspected Eric was either sent by Marcy, the jealous ex, or by Jim. Detectives didn't have an exact address for Eric, but they did have an approximation of his location. So they pulled up to the area, and sure enough, they found him. And when detectives approached Eric, he tried to run off and even pushed one of them out of his way. But detectives pulled out their weapons and ordered him to stop running. Eric stopped, and police brought him into the station. Once at the station, Eric refused to talk to police, so they arrested him on the spot for resisting and obstruction. With Eric in custody, police looked through his phone records to see if they could find anything about him being ordered to murder Julii by Marcy or Jim, but they couldn't find anything between Eric and Marcy or between Eric and Jim. So they went digging into Eric's arrest records, and they found that Eric had just been pulled over a couple of days before Juli's murder. And when he was pulled over, he was in the SUV that police had seen him leaving and entering in the surveillance from the LA Fitness cameras. However, the SUV did not belong to Eric. It was registered to a man named George Ryder. George Ryder, at the time 58 years old, had a reputation in Detroit. He had a lengthy criminal record of sales of narcotics just like Jimmy. However, George was supposedly reformed from his past and began working as a music promoter and a real estate developer, which police had assumed these were all laundering fronts for his real illegitimate dealings. So what was George's relationship to Eric? Well, George was Eric's uncle. Being that it was discovered that George and Eric were related, this led police to believe that Marcy more than likely had nothing to do with Juli's murder. But instead, Julii must have just been in the wrong place at the wrong time in a war between two notable drug lords. In theory being, George wanted to get at Jimmy in the harshest form by way of Julii and got his nephew to do the dirty work for him. But then investigators received the transcripts of Marcy's text messages and saw that she had been texting an unsaved number the night before Juli's death and the morning of. The number was linked to a prepaid burner phone, which police had traced the number to and found it in the possession of George Ryder in Detroit. Police pulled George over and asked if they could question him in the back of the cruiser, to which George obliged.
This is part of a homicide investigation. Obviously, that's why we came the way we did, okay? Because, you know, we don't know who's involved and who may be armed, who may not be. Oh, okay. You don't know a girl named Marcy? No. You don't know Marcy Griffin? Well, one of the phones you had on you is called Marcy Griffin. Hundreds of times.
Police knew he was lying, but they allowed him to leave the cruiser regardless. However, they asked him to leave them with his phone that he used to contact Marcy with, and they were able to seize the phone as evidence due to the court orders they had that subpoenaed the phone. Now, the only solid evidence that linked George and Eric together on the morning of Juli's murder were the pings from the cell phone towers in the Metro Detroit area that placed them both in the same area at the same time. Phone records showed that both George and Eric traveled together from Detroit to Warren, leaving investigators to realize that George had to have been the driver. Just before 7 a.m., both of their phones were turned off with zero activity, and then both turned back on around 7:30 a.m. They both pinged together again and traveled back to the starting point in Detroit where they linked up at. This established a clear timeline of events for investigators to follow. Phone records from the burner phone that George used showed texts sent back and forth between him and Marcy, which revealed that George and Marcy were in a whole intimate relationship. There were a bunch of flirty texts. I miss you, I can't wait to see my baby, stuff like that. However, a specific text thread between the two on the morning of the murder stuck out the most. It read, from George to Marcy, "Good morning, sunshine. Today is a beautiful day, Friday the 13th. And Marcy replied and said, LOL. George said, I hope you understand. Marcy said, everything about I understand. Investigators were able to draw up the theory that Eric was driven to Jimmy's neighborhood by George in George's Nissan Pathfinder SUV near the LA Fitness parking lot. Eric got out of the car. Once he saw Julii leaving Jim's condo, he ran up to her and shot her cold-blooded 7 times. The text thread between Marcy and George was enough for police to secure arrest warrants for George, Marcy, and Eric. And in February of 2017, the 3 of them were arrested and charged with premeditated murder. And during trial, Macomb County prosecutors said this all only happened because Marcy was enraged and jealous of Julii. It was also a theory that this was a murder for hire plot. Marcy asked her boyfriend, George, to kill Julii, and George opted to pay his nephew Eric to do the job for him and offered to be his ride. Prosecutors agreed that Marcy was the mastermind, George was the middleman, and Eric was the gunman. However, representation for Marcy had argued that Marcy actually had nothing to do with the murder, and George orchestrated this on his own as a peculiar way of trying to make Marcy feel better by getting rid of the one woman she hated the most. This theory was presented as an attempt to acquit Marcy of her charges altogether, but the jury wasn't having it. And in 2019, a verdict was reached, and all 3 suspects were found guilty and charged with life sentences with no chance of probation and no bail. Following the verdict, Julii's family had given emotional statements in court. Julii's daughter Kira, 17 years old at the time, said to Marcy, "For you to be fighting for justice to get out of jail, you are full of shit. Like, for real, you really are full of shit, Marcy. I don't know what my mama did to you. I really don't, but I wouldn't wish that on nobody. Literally nobody." Julii's great aunt Pamela Johnson was there too, and she asked Marcy, "What was so much hatred for? How can you, as a human being, have so much hatred in you? To sit with no remorse, but you have to live with what you did. You know your role, your part in this, and you have to live with it every day. You should have taken care of your own life, and maybe you wouldn't have been so angry. You were angry and ugly towards my niece. You have your own children, and it seems like they didn't even matter." And she also said to George, "You, sir, you are over 60. You've thrown your whole life away, huh? Find some peace. And when you find that peace, apologize to Julii." Julii's mother didn't attend any court proceedings. It was just too much for her. She was way too distraught. Eric Gibson had something to say to the court, and he told the court he was innocent. Eric said, "My condolences to the family for their loss. I hope they find the person who committed this heinous crime. Michigan State Police and Warren Police illegally obtained my DNA and forced evidence against me to make it look like I committed this crime." What a way to plead his case. Now, while researching this case, I came upon some interesting information, like how representatives for the 3 charged felt like they never stood a chance to prove their innocence anyway, due to the fact that the jury was mostly a white jury, and they asked for a retrial. However, that motion was denied, and also the irony behind George's arrest. You see, it was being said that when George was arrested, the feds had gotten immediately involved because they had been watching George for a whole 20 years. You see, George was a folk hero in the east side streets of Detroit. He had served time for federal narcotic trafficking in the 90s and was released in 2003. George had built a very sturdy real estate portfolio and bought up a bunch of property, including the Fine Arts Theater in downtown Detroit. And in 2015, he sold the Fine Arts Theater for $1.3 million. The feds had been waiting for an opportunity to swoop in and nail him to the cross. And on the same afternoon of George and his co-D's arrests, a meeting took place with the agents from the ATF, FBI, and the Warren Police at the Warren Police Station. It had came out that what really was going on and why they were there was a federal agent named Karen Reynolds. Apparently, she wanted him on murder charges so that she can then stick him with a RICO indictment. This was because she was personally affected by a murder that she believes that George allegedly committed in 2007 when a woman named Valerie Atkin was shot to death in a restroom in the Fine Arts Theater. See, Valerie was a friend of Karen's, so this was very personal for her. And there was also another situation prior where police had shut down the feds' attempt at nailing him for something else back in 2003. It's unclear at this point if the feds were successful at interrupting this specific case at all. However, it's clear that George's days as a free man were numbered at the pace he was going. This story is a sad tale of how envy, obsession, and an intense need for control over another human life ultimately ended in bloodshed and an untimely demise for a beautiful young mother who was innocent in the midst of large egos and pure hate. Marcy had an unhealthy obsession over Jimmy. She couldn't hold on to Jimmy regardless of their 17-year stint with each other and 2 children. She didn't love Jimmy. She wanted full control over him, and if she couldn't have him, no one could. Which brings me to George. What does it say about the man who is willingly in a relationship with a woman and watching her seethe over her ex? Every day you had to look at her, knowing that her sights were on someone else. Which leads me to ask, was George also obsessing over Marcy? Why didn't he leave her knowing she was so focused on her ex? Was he so obsessed with pleasing her by any means that he'd do anything she said, including murdering a woman he had 0 ties to, just to make her happy in hopes of gaining the attention from her that she gave to another man? And the children. Julii's daughter, now a young 22-year-old woman, has had to go the last several years navigating life without her mom to show her the way. And she'll never get those life lessons, those mommy-daughter dates, none of that with her mother ever again. And Jim's children also lost their mother to the system. It doesn't compare to the end of life like Julii. However, they too have to grow up without their mother making their meals, seeing them off to school, kissing them, hugging them, all because she allowed her big ego to cloud her judgment. And Eric, who is now pushing 30, lost the rest of his 20s to prison and will never know what it's like to navigate this world in his 30s, 40s, 50s, and so on. And so my question to him is, was the money worth it? George, he was already grown old. He could have made the choice to stay a free man. Instead, he didn't see the bigger picture and unfortunately recruited his young relative to do his dirty work for him. Yet and still, he would have to be okay with the idea of dying as a man behind bars. And lastly, Jim. I can't imagine what it was like for him to have been kissing his lady goodbye, thinking he would see her again when she got off work, and just minutes later, looking at her lifeless body riddled in bullets just outside his home. I pray for his healing. I can only imagine the trauma that comes with those visuals. And guess what? Marcy lost her cool for essentially no reason at all, because Jim and Julii were never getting married. They only went to Vegas for a mini vacay. In fact, Julii wasn't ready to marry Jim yet because she felt like he still had some maturing to do. Crazy, right? To those listening to this story, if you're ever in a situation where you see the red flags, please don't ignore them. Starve your ego. If the relationship you're in has any volatile components, end it. It's not worth your safety or your life. Place your mind over your heart. That's why our crown chakra is above the heart. It's mind over matter. It's been 5 years since Julii's been gone. I'm sending my deepest, most sincerest condolences to the loved ones of Julii Johnson. May your beautiful spirit rest in heavenly peace. Gone, but never, ever forgotten.